It was a quiet little town where everyone knew each other. The houses were small but full of love. Children played on the streets. Old men sat outside their homes telling stories, and life was simple. But in this town, I carried a secret one that no one knew, one that I never spoke about. If you're listening to this, stay with me until the end. This is not just a story. It is something that will touch your heart, something that will make you think, something that might even change your life. I was just a boy when I first found out about the secret. It was the kind of secret that made my heart heavy, the kind that made me feel alone, even when I was surrounded by people. My mother always told me a secret kept too long becomes a burden, but some secrets I thought were better left hidden. My father was a kind man, always smiling, always helping others. People in the town loved him. They said he was a man with a golden heart. My mother was gentle, her voice like a lullaby, always comforting, always warm. Together, they made our home feel like the safest place in the world. But there was one thing no one knew. My father had an illness, one that made him weak, one that slowly took away his strength. Every night, after everyone slept, I would hear my mother cry. She tried to hide it, but I knew. Why don't we tell someone? I once asked. She smiled, but her eyes were sad. Because, my dear, some things we carry not because we have to, but because we love. I didn't understand then, but I do now. Days passed, then months. My father still smiled, still helped others, even when his hands shook, even when his legs felt weak. The town never knew. He never let them see. One evening, as the sun painted the sky with orange and pink, my father and I sat outside. He looked at me and said, "Son, do you know the strongest people are not the ones who fight, but the ones who love, even when it's hard?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure what he meant. "One day, you will understand," he said. "And when you do, never stop loving, never stop caring. Even when life is unfair, even when it hurts." That night, I heard my mother cry again. But this time, I sat beside her. I held her hand. "Mom, you are not alone," I whispered. She looked at me, surprised. And then, for the first time in a long time, she smiled, not a sad smile, but a real one. The days grew colder, and so did my father's health. He still smiled, still laughed, but I could see it. The pain in his eyes, the tiredness in his body. And then one morning, he didn't wake up. The town was silent that day. People came, offering their words, their prayers. They talked about how kind he was, how much he had done for them. "He never asked for anything," one man said. "Always gave, always helped." That was when I understood. My father's secret was not his illness. His secret was love that he gave without expecting anything in return. I stood before the people and said, "My father taught me something. Love is not about how much you say it. Love is about what you do, even when no one sees, even when no one knows." Tears filled many eyes that day. And in that moment, I knew my father was still there, in their hearts, in their kindness, in the love he had left behind. Now, I carry his secret, not as a burden, but as a gift. I help when I can, I love without reason, and I give without expecting. Because that is what he taught me. If you're still listening, I want you to remember this love is the most powerful thing in the world. It can heal, it can change, it can make the darkest days bright. So love, even when it's hard. Help, even when no one sees. And never forget, the smallest kindness can change a life. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Life in the town slowly returned to normal, but for me, nothing was ever the same. My father's absence was like a quiet echo in our home, always there, always felt but never spoken about. My mother tried her best to be strong, but at night I still heard her soft sobs. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sun go down, an old woman from the neighborhood walked up to me. She placed a gentle hand on my shoulder and said, "Your father was a great man. Do you know what he did for me?" I shook my head. She smiled, her eyes filled with memories. Many years ago, I had nothing. My husband had left, my children had abandoned me, and I had no food. One night, when I thought I could not go on anymore, your father knocked on my door. He gave me food. He gave me blankets, and he gave me hope. I felt my throat tighten. He never told anyone, she continued. He just helped because that's who he was. And because of him, I am still here today. Tears welled in my eyes, but I smiled. That was my father. He never wanted credit, never wanted praise. He just wanted to help. As the days passed, I started hearing more stories. A young boy told me, "Your father bought me my first book when my family couldn't afford school supplies. He said education was the greatest gift." A shopkeeper whispered, "When my business was failing, your father paid for my rent without ever asking for it back. He saved my family." A stranger on the street said, "I was lost, I was broken, but your father sat with me, spoke to me, and reminded me that I was not alone." Each story was a piece of him, a part of his love that he had left behind. I realized then that my father had not truly left. He was still here, in every heart he had touched, in every life he had changed. One night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I thought about the secret he had kept. The secret of giving, of loving, of being kind, even when no one was watching. I made a promise to myself. I would carry his secret forward. I would be the kind of person he was. I would help, I would love, and I would give, not for recognition, not for praise, but because the world needed more people like him. The next morning, I saw a little boy sitting on the sidewalk, his shoes torn, his clothes worn out. He looked hungry, cold. Without a second thought, I walked into a nearby shop, bought him a warm meal, and handed it to him. His eyes widened in surprise. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. I smiled, "Because someone once helped me." As I walked away, I felt something I had not felt in a long time, a warmth in my heart, a sense of peace. And I knew then that my father's secret was no longer just his. It was mine too. If you are still listening, I want you to take this with you. Be kind, be generous, and love without expecting anything in return. The smallest act of kindness can change someone's life. You may not see it, but it matters. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe. It takes time and effort to share these stories, and your support means everything. Stay with me for more stories that will warm your heart and inspire your soul. The days continued, but something inside me had changed. Every morning, I woke up with a new purpose, not just to live, but to give, to help, to be a light for someone else. That one day, as I walked through the town, I saw a man sitting alone on a bench. His clothes were torn, his hands rough and tired. He stared at the ground, lost in thought. Without hesitation, I sat beside him. He glanced at me but said nothing. After a moment, I spoke. "Are you okay?" He let out a dry laugh. No one has asked me that in years. I didn't say anything, just waited. Sometimes silence is the best way to listen. After a long pause, he sighed. I used to have everything: money, a house, a family, but I lost it all. And now no one even looks at me. I thought about my father, about the love he had given to everyone, even strangers. "You are not invisible," I said softly. "I see you, and I want you to know that you matter." His eyes filled with tears. No words, just silent gratitude. Reached into my pocket and handed him some money. "Buy yourself a warm meal today. And remember, life can change. You are not alone." For the first time, he smiled. A small smile, but a real one. As I walked away, I felt something deep in my heart, a warmth, a sense of peace. My father's secret was working through me. Next day, I decided to do more. I gathered some old clothes, packed some food, and walked through the streets, looking for those in need. Every person I helped, every smile I received, reminded me of my father's words. The strongest people are the ones who love, even when it's hard. One evening, as I was helping an old man carry his groceries home, a young girl watched me from across the street. She was no older than 10, her big eyes filled with curiosity. "Why are you helping him?" she finally asked. I knelt down to her level and smiled. "Because kindness is a gift that never runs out." She thought for a moment, then nodded. The next day, I saw her sharing her lunch with a boy who had none. And in that moment, I realized kindness spreads. It starts with one person, one small act, and then it grows. The town began to notice. People started helping each other more. Strangers smiled at one another. Shopkeepers left extra food for those who couldn't afford it. It was like my father's love had come alive in all of us. And then one night, as I sat outside looking at the stars, my mother joined me. "You have his heart," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "Your father would be proud." I looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I saw happiness in her eyes. Not just sadness, not just memories, but hope. At that moment, I understood something important. Love never truly leaves. It stays in the kindness we share and the good we do in the lives we touch. My father may not be here, but his love was still changing the world through me, through my mother, through the people he had helped. And now, through you. If this story touched your heart, remember, kindness is a gift we all have. Use it, give, and share it. You never know how much one small act of love can change someone's life. Days passed, then weeks, and the little acts of kindness continued to grow. It was as if my father's spirit had awakened something in the town, something beautiful, something powerful. One morning, as I walked to the market, a little boy ran up to me. His face was bright with excitement. Mister, he called. I stopped and smiled. What is it? He held out a small, crumpled piece of bread. I saw a hungry dog today, and I gave him my food, just like you gave food to that man. My heart swelled with pride. I knelt down and ruffled his hair. That was very kind of you. How did it feel? He grinned. It felt warm, like sunshine in my chest. I laughed, nodding. That's what kindness does. It makes your heart shine. He ran off, his laughter echoing in the street. And in that moment, I realized something. Kindness wasn't just changing lives, it was shaping hearts. It was becoming a part of people's stories, just like it had become a part of mine. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat on a bench in the park, lost in thought. A young woman sat down beside me. She looked tired, as if the weight of the world rested on her shoulders. After a few moments, she sighed. Can I tell you something? I turned to her and nodded. Of course. She hesitated, then whispered, I was going to give up today. My heart clenched. Give up? She nodded, her eyes filled with unshed tears. Life has been so hard. I lost my job, my family doesn't talk to me, and I feel invisible. I took a deep breath, remembering my father's words. You are not invisible, I said softly. You are here, you are breathing, and that means you still have a story to write. A tear rolled down her cheek. But what if I don't know how to keep going? I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small note. It was something I had written a long time ago, a message to remind myself on the hard days. I unfolded it and handed it to her. It read, The world needs your light. Even on the days you don't feel it, even when the darkness is heavy, someone out there needs you. Keep going. She read the words slowly, her fingers trembling. Then she looked at me, her lips quivering into the smallest smile. Thank you, she whispered. No one has ever told me that before. And in that moment, I knew my father's secret wasn't just about giving things. It was about giving hope. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt something shift inside me. The pain of losing my father was still there, but it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a purpose. I wasn't just carrying his secret anymore. I was living it. The next day, I started something new. I wrote little notes of kindness and left them in random places, on benches, inside library books, at cafe tables. Each note had a simple message. You matter. You are loved. The world is better because you are in it. At first, I didn't know if anyone would find them. But then, one afternoon, I saw an old man pick up one of the notes. He read it slowly, then closed his eyes, pressing the paper to his heart. And in that moment, I understood sometimes the smallest words can save a life. Weeks later, I walked past a cafe, and saw a woman slip a note into a stranger's hand. The stranger read it, smiled, and wiped away a tear. Kindness was spreading, not just from me, but from everyone who had been touched by it. It was like a ripple in a pond, one small act, creating waves that reached farther than I could ever imagine. One evening, as I sat on my porch, my mother joined me. She looked at me with tears in her eyes, but this time they weren't from sadness. "You had made your father proud," she whispered. I took her hand and squeezed it gently. "We both have." The stars above shone brighter that night. Maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe, just maybe, my father was watching, smiling, knowing that his secret was no longer a secret. It was now a story of love, a story of hope, a story that would never end. And if you are still listening, I want you to take this story with you. Carry it in your heart, live it in your actions. Be the reason someone believes in kindness again, because the world needs more love, and it starts with you. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe. It takes time, effort, and love to bring these stories to you, and your support means everything. Stay with me for more stories that will warm your soul and remind you of the beauty of kindness. The days turned into months, and something beautiful began to happen in the town. People who once walked past each other in silence now exchanged smiles. Strangers helped one another without hesitation. Little acts of kindness became a part of daily life. One morning, as I walked to the market, I saw a man struggling to carry a heavy bag. Without thinking, I rushed over to help. "Let me take that," I said, lifting the bag from his hands. He looked at me with surprise. "Why are you helping me?" I smiled. "Because someone once helped me." He chuckled, shaking his head. "The world needs more people like you." I thought about his words for a moment, then replied, "The world needs more people like us, people who choose kindness." He nodded, his eyes shining with understanding. "Then I'll do the same for someone else." And just like that, the kindness continued to spread. One evening, as I sat outside watching the sunset, a young boy ran up to me. He was out of breath, his face glowing with excitement. "I did it," he said, grinning from ear to ear. I raised an eyebrow. "Did what?" "I helped an old lady carry her groceries today." And she smiled so big. My heart warmed. "How did that make you feel?" He put a hand over his chest, like my heart got bigger. I laughed. "That's because kindness makes our hearts grow." The boy beamed, then ran off to tell his friends. And I knew in that moment that the seed of kindness had taken root in him. But the most unexpected thing happened one afternoon. As I walked through town, I saw a familiar face, the young woman I had met in the park, the one who had told me she was ready to give up. She looked different now. There was light in her eyes, hope in her smile. And beside her was a little girl, holding her hand. She saw me and walked over. "I want you to meet someone," she said, looking down at the child. "This is my daughter," she continued. That night in the park, I was ready to give up, but your words saved me. And because of you, she still has a mother. Tears stung my eyes as I looked at the little girl who smiled shyly at me. I knelt down. You have a very strong mama, I told her. The woman's eyes glistened. No, I had a stranger who reminded me that I mattered. I stood up, my heart full. You were never a stranger, I said. You were someone who just needed to be reminded of your own strength. She hugged me then, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the true weight of my father's secret. It was never just about giving food to the hungry or helping someone carry their things. It was about reminding people that they are seen, that they matter, that love still exists in the world. And now, I want to remind you, if you're still listening, know this, you matter. Even on the days when you feel invisible, even when life is heavy, you are here, and the world is better because of you. Carry this kindness forward. Be the reason someone smiles. Be the reason someone finds hope again. Because kindness is a light, and when we share it, the darkness fades. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe. Your support means the world to me, and it helps bring more stories that remind us of the beauty in humanity. Stay with me because together we can make the world a little brighter, one story at a time.